I'm Keith Singer. I'm going to go over the Petition for Dissolution of Marriage form, at least as it's provided by the Self-Help Center. We do a little bit of a different version of this when we represent our clients, but for the Self-Help form, a lot of the work is done for you, so let me walk through it. At the top left-hand corner, you're going to put in your name, address, city, state, zip, and your identifying information. Moving down, you'll put yourself as the petitioning party, presumably, and the other party as the respondent. The case number at the top right-hand corner and the assigned judge, those get stamped in after you file the case, so don't worry about those now. Walking down the form, first it's going to collect a bunch of information about you. Information about you as the petitioner, information about the other party, name, address, date of birth, occupation, stuff like that. The date of the marriage, where you were married, moving on to the second page of the form, whether you meet the 90-day requirement. In Arizona, there's a domicile requirement. You have to be living with the intent to remain in Arizona for at least 90 days in order to file for divorce here. And so you're affirming at the top of page 2 of the Petition for Dissolution whether you meet that requirement or whether your spouse meets that requirement if you don't. Moving on, you've got to indicate whether there's been any significant domestic violence if you're sharing joint legal decision making or equal parenting time for children. The form asks if the wife is pregnant, and if she is, or if you have some suspicion of that, you want to indicate as such. Moving on, you'll reflect the names and birth dates of any minor children of the marriage. Going on in the form, you'll indicate whether you want sole legal decision making of the children, joint legal decision making of the children, and if there's any supervision, there's provision for that as well. Next, the form allows the request for child support if that's appropriate, and there's a bunch of checkoffs to indicate whether the court has jurisdiction and whether it's appropriate to issue a child support order as part of the divorce. Moving on in the form, it requests information about whether any property or debts have been acquired during the marriage and what those are and how they should be divided between you or your spouse. There's very detailed lists of all the different types of assets that you might have, and you can be quite detailed if you wish. Many of the self-represented cases go through the default process as opposed to the consent decree process. We'll get into that in detail in this video, but it's important that you be as detailed as you can in what you want the court to order if you're going to go through that default process, because the court may look to the petition for dissolution to determine whether the ultimate orders that you're requesting are consistent with that. So if there's a deviation in the final orders to the petition, the judge may reject it. So that's a reason why you'd want to be really thorough in what you're asking for. There are spaces to list motor vehicles, VIN numbers, all the details about your assets and debts. If there's any separate property, meaning property acquired prior to the marriage or obtained from a will or from a gift separately to one spouse, that's to be indicated on page 6 of the self-help form. Any separate debts are also listed. There's a provision for how you want your taxes to be filed. And finally, requests if it's appropriate for spousal maintenance, alimony. If you think you're entitled to spousal maintenance, or if you think the other party is, it's appropriate to request that in the first pleading to the court. Finally, there are some affirmations that have to be made in the petition for dissolution, that the marriage is irretrievably broken without prospect for reconciliation, that there isn't a covenant marriage. This is a special form of marriage that is more difficult to get into, has some extra steps, and requires some extra steps to get out of. You'd know it if you had a covenant marriage. You affirm whether the conciliation requirements under Arizona law have been met. We'll get into that in a separate video, and whether the court has jurisdiction. And then finally, you ask the court to dissolve the marriage, to issue a child support order, to divide the assets, and that's the final section of the petition for dissolution form. Finally, there is an oath or verification where you'll sign the petition in front of a notary. I believe this can be done by the clerks as well, or in front of the clerks when you pay the filing fee down at the bottom floor of the court, and then this document is ready to be submitted. That's the petition for dissolution of marriage. Thank you.